the agenda for today is basically I'm going to introduce somewhat the climate situation and some background. I'm going to talk about CDR, which stands for carbon dioxide removal, and I'm going to talk about kind of some definitions in that and what that is and why it matters and what it's not. Also, there are some things that get associated with climate that solutions that are different, and I want to talk about that. In addition, we'll be then I'll go into kind of what I've been studying over the last several months is what's going on in the world of CDR and what are some of the companies and the research and the activities that are happening in CDR. And I'll go through that, and I'm not going to do an exhaustive discussion of that, but I'll give you a sampling and some areas to follow up if you're interested. And I'm going to close with a little bit of some thoughts on how we, either within Rotary or just as individuals, can take action on climate change and climate issues more generally beyond CDR. CDR is one area that is active, but I'm going to talk about what may be opportunities to take action more generally. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start with a little bit of background. I first learned about global warming in about 1978. I was a freshman in college, and yes, that's a picture of me. That was before color film was available, I think, so it's in black and white. I took a class in freshman year, which was called Environmental Science and Technology. And in that class, they introduced many topics of interest, but one topic was global warming. And they introduced us to this thing called the Keeling curve, which is this curve that shows an increasing carbon dioxide level and how it varies from one year to the next because of there's more plants in the northern hemisphere. It goes up and down this way, and it was a very interesting thing. And it was a scientific field that was really starting to get some attention after it had been many years. This data started getting taken in 1956, so it wasn't a brand new topic, but it was definitely science that was getting more attention. There was an article published that same year, is mankind warming the earth? That was in a bulletin of the atomic scientists, and that created a little bit of buzz, and a young congressman from Georgia was reelected to office. Oh, sorry, Tennessee was reelected to office, and also in 1978 for his second term in Congress. That was Al Gore. And so, this was all things that were going on in that area of time. And like a lot of people, I kind of flash back of what I learned about global warming in that time frame. And I kind of put it maybe into my mind, but then I rapidly put it in the back of my mind. And it was like, yeah. We'll figure that out. We got time. And it's not like something that was that urgent. But fast forward 44 years or so, and I think most people agree that most of the planet now is experiencing impacts of climate change, some more significantly than others. And from extreme heat to wildfires to droughts, and the coral bleaching and the polar ice caps and the flooding and the fires, all of this is really adding up and taking a toll. And this photo is actually from the Tubbs Fire in Sonoma County, where most of us live, and where in 2017 many of our neighborhoods looked a lot like this. And when your neighborhood looks a lot like this, it made a lot of us, including me, start to really think about whether we had just been, visited by climate change. And it definitely caused a little bit of I guess, soul searching and head scratching and wondering what's going on. And for me, that was a time where I had the opportunity to start thinking about it again in more depth. And as an engineer, I'm sort of interested in understanding problems and being analytical and being able to understand and be able to explain these kinds of issues. So, back to I went back to some basics, with, okay, what's the atmosphere again, and what exactly are we doing to it? And so this is a simple picture of the atmosphere, and it has this layer of the globe has this layer called the atmosphere that is like the egg shell of an egg. And so it's very thin, it's very delicate, and it's got just the right Goldilocks mix of gases that allow it to provide just enough warming for the globe, for the support of life. And that mix of chemicals is just the right balance. And what's going on as we have evolved to burning all these fossil fuels is we've started to impact that balance by increasing the amount of this blanket, which includes gases like carbon dioxide that kind of allow the sun's energies to get absorbed by the earth. We've allowed that to get kind of out of whack, and it's now absorbing a lot more energy from the sun and not letting it re-radiate back into space. So I don't want to go through a lot of engineering or technology, but I did want to cover 3 numbers that I'm going to talk about in some detail that kind of put some of this, like how much are we doing to the earth. So the first number I'd like to cover is 1,000, and it's 1,000 is the number of gigatons of excess carbon dioxide that mankind has put into the atmosphere in the pre-industrial era. So before the industrial age, there was a certain amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and we have increased that by 1,000 gigatons. So by the burning of fossil fuels, basically. So that's a pretty big number. But what's a gigaton, and how does that really? That's just a big number. It doesn't really mean anything. It is worth noting here that 1,000 gigatons is the total. Per year, worldwide emissions are about 40 gigatons of CO2 that we're emitting. And so to put a gigaton in perspective, a gigaton is a billion tons. And you can do it in tons, metric tons, which are a little bigger than English tons, but it's not that different. So you can just think of it as a billion tons. And that's about the same as the emissions from the light duty vehicle fleet in 2017. So that's a pretty good chunk. That's a gigaton. So remember, the world emits 40 gigatons per year. And so all the US light duty vehicles emitted a gigaton in 2017. Sometimes with gases, people think, oh, that's kind of hard to think about. So it's gas with weight. So what if we put it in terms of something with a real world weight? 1 gigaton would be about the same as the weight of 1,200 Golden Gate bridges. So it's a pretty big number. It's not an infinite number, but it's a big number. And so that's just to put a little bit of perspective. So remember, back to the 1,000, we have 1,000 gigatons of excess carbon dioxide relative to what it was before the industrial age hanging around in our atmosphere. And that's about the same as far as weight as 1,200 Golden Gate bridges times 1,000, because 1,000 gigatons, 1 gigaton is 1,200 Golden Gate bridges. So there's a lot of a way to think about this, but one analogy that some people like is the bathtub. So we had this CO2 level in the atmosphere, which was just right for the Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold. CO2 is just the right amount of warming for the planet for life to flourish on the Earth. And then we started emitting carbon dioxide through the burning of fossil fuels. We started pouring more stuff into the atmosphere. And that's when the CO2 levels have been rising. And natural processes like the oceans and geological processes can absorb some of that carbon dioxide, but not fast enough. And so the levels have been rising, and they'll just keep rising if we don't turn off the spigot. And even if we turn off the spigot, there's still going to be a lot of excess carbon dioxide relative to the Goldilocks level that was there before. So hopefully that analogy sort of helps in one way. So 1,000 gigatons is the first number to keep in mind. The second one is 420, and that is the parts per million of carbon dioxide that is the concentration in the atmosphere today. So that atmosphere, that eggshell, has 420 parts per million of CO2. That's 0.04%. So that is a small, seems like a small relative amount, but that's 50% higher than it was before the industrial age, when it was about 270 parts per million. So it's a significant change. In fact, if you look at the last 800,000 years of carbon dioxide concentration, it's gone up and down, in different ways. But since the industrial age, we're up, this is a little bit older slide, but we're up at 420 parts per million relative to what it's been over the last 800,000 years. So in geological time, we've really hit this with a big shock here. And it's really, something that life hasn't really had to adapt to. The Goldilocks is no longer applicable up here. And so one more number here is 1.5 degrees Celsius. That would be the temperature increase to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. And there's a lot of discussion if it's 1.5 or 1.6 or even 2.0. It's going to get worse and worse. But scientists have kind of said, okay, 1.5 is a goal. We're not there yet, but we're rapidly approaching it. So far, since the industrial age, we have climbed up about 1.1 to 1.2 degrees. So we're here. And depending on what actions that is mankind, chooses, we could end up on any of these trajectories here. This is the International Panel for Climate Change analysis and their various scenarios. And you could see this scenario where it keeps rising is well past the danger zone of 1.5 degrees up into the 5 degrees. That's the kind of do nothing and just let business as usual, versus different levels of severity in terms of how how quickly we can address climate change moving forward. So one thing I want to just point out that we've waited so long to address this problem that the IPCC now says, if we had really been, listened to Jimmy Carter and then listened to Al Gore, we might have gotten by with just reducing and mitigating our carbon, but carbon stays in the environment for a very long time, like 1,000 years, where the carbon dioxide just sits up there, and it doesn't go away unless unless these natural processes take it away. But now the IPCC is saying in their 2018 report, they said all pathways that limit warming to 1.5 degrees C or less must use carbon dioxide removal. And they go on to say how many gigatons it is. But in each of the successive reports, IPCC is relying more and more on carbon dioxide removal to get to the goal of 1.5 degrees. And in fact, most analysts are now saying that we're not going to meet the 1.5, that we're going to exceed 1.5. Now, how much we exceed 1.5, it might be more the argument now. But in the recent COP27 summit, they decided to keep the 1.5 goal because that hasn't been exceeded yet, and it's still a very good goal to have, even if we end up going over it a little bit. One thing that I'll point out also at this COP27 summit, when President Biden spoke, he reiterated that the United States will meet its goal for emissions targets by 2030, and that's a 50% reduction in emissions from 2005 levels. And I want to just talk about that for a moment, which is emissions reductions are very important and really, really good. And if we can make that goal, that will be tremendous and a big accomplishment. And it will be, I think, more than we've ever done to address that goal. So it'll be really great. But at the same time, when you decrease the emissions, you're kind of let's say put the analogy that you have a fever and you would like the doctor to heal you by removing your fever, but the doctor gives you a prescription which says, oh, your fever won't go up by that much. It'll only go up a little bit more. And that would be something that you might not be too satisfied with. You might want to say, doctor, can't you get rid of my fever? Get me back to normal. And reducing emissions, as much as it's important, doesn't get us back to normal. It doesn't remove all that legacy carbon dioxide. It doesn't get us back to where we have the Goldilocks situation. Carbon dioxide removal does have the potential to do that, and that's why it's getting a lot of attention and a lot of interest. But it's a really big job, and so just reviewing the numbers for a second: 1,000 gigatons of excess carbon, 420 parts per million, and 1.5 degrees. Reducing our emissions don't just mean that we won't go past those by too much more, so much faster. It won't bring any of those numbers down. So I just wanted to emphasize that point. So where I've come to in this thing is we really need to focus on 3 areas in climate generally. Today, I'm going to talk about carbon dioxide removal, but reducing our carbon dioxide emissions is critical, and we have to keep doing that. Adaptation is critical. We've got, floods in Pakistan. We've got, coastal areas that are getting impacted and need to prepare people need to move homes. We've got flooding issues and some river basins that we need to be better prepared for. So climate action is in a lot of areas, but I put it into these three areas, and these two would be a good topic for another day. I'm going to focus now more on carbon dioxide removal. So any questions before I go on?
Yeah, Peter, there's some removal that happens naturally, just
Yep.
not fast enough. So if we just hung out long enough, would that be fast enough if we just stopped emitting, or how much trouble would we be in if we didn't do removal?
It's we would not do it fast enough. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things like planting trees and things that are basically natural processes. But I heard the terms biomimicry and geomimicry recently. I'd never heard the term geomimicry till recently, but we can't wait for nature to solve this. It's too big a spike. Nature can't do it on its own. We have to figure out ways to help nature to do it, and maybe take advantage of nature in some way, or to invent technologies that do things that simulate what nature does. And so if we did nothing and waited, the carbon dioxide still stays up there. It stays up there, basically forever. In the terms of this, we're going to get to the 5 degrees C by 2100 if we don't do anything. And reducing the emissions will bend that curve, so maybe we only get to 2.5 or something. But stopping emissions is not enough. And by the way, in case you haven't, stopping emissions is very hard. And in particular, it's very difficult for certain applications like fertilizer and jet fuel and developing economies, things that are much more difficult than like reducing our use of gas-powered blowers for our gardens. That's probably one that we could probably do, but using fossil fuels for other things that really support fundamentals of life is very important. So we're going to keep emitting. We can't take emissions to zero. In other words, we're going to keep emitting, and so we need to balance those emissions so we don't keep this temperature rising into the future. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anything else? Okay. So now we're going to talk about some definitions. Now that we've covered all the numbers that you need to know, we're going to talk about some definitions. CDR is a term that's being widely used, and it's been defined by this this professor, Jennifer Wilcox, who's becoming my climate hero. She edited this book called the CDR Primer. So CDR includes activities that remove CO2 from the atmosphere and durably store it in geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoirs or in products. And I'm going to stay on this for just a second so you can maybe read that again. It's this is what CDR means. I think Professor Wilcox kind of defined it, but this is what the definition that we're going with is. Okay, removing CDR is removing CO2 and durably storing it, geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoirs, or in products. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, the how of that, or how that looks in a few minutes. But some other terms that are used, almost synonymous with CDR, There's also this one called greenhouse gas removal. Greenhouse gases include carbon dioxide as well as other things like methane and nitrous oxides and some of the chlorofluorocarbons that were used as refrigerants. All these things are greenhouse gases. The biggest one and the longest term one is carbon dioxide. There's some exciting work being done in the area of methane removal too. Again, a topic for another day, but methane has a big impact over a shorter time frame than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide has a significant impact because there's so much of it, but also because it lasts so long in the atmosphere. So the other term that's used is negative emissions technology, or NET, and that term isn't used as much anymore because not all of the CDR or GGR techniques are technical or technology oriented. Some of them are more nature oriented. So this term is generally not used, but you see it in some of the literature. These are the terms that are being used, and we're going to stick with this one tonight, focus on carbon dioxide. So CDR and GGR are also now getting associated with the words climate restoration. And this is actually the name of a book now that some of us have read, and it's really defines what that exactly is, but it's bringing the climate back to back to the way it was in the Goldilocks days. And so these terms can be thought of synonymously: CDR, climate restoration, GGR, but there are some differences in the language, but that's kind of the summary. One thing to point out, though, is that CDR is not the same as CCS. Okay, so what's CCS besides just another acronym? That's carbon capture and storage, and that's what typically associated with the capture and geological sequestration, removal, or storage of point source CO2 to prevent emissions from entering the atmosphere. So it's a emissions mitigation or reduction. It's not a removal. So that's why CCS and CDR are different. CDR is taking the atmospheric carbon dioxide and removing it and permanently storing it, or durably storing it. I also want to point out that CDR and CCS are both very different from SRM, which is yet another three-letter acronym. That stands for Solar Radiation Management. And this is ways of actually tweaking how much radiation comes into the Earth. And there are different technologies being investigated. For example, spraying with high altitude aircraft, spraying sulfur dioxide in the stratosphere so that the sun's energy bounces off and simulates getting the planet into that Goldilocks zone by reducing how much solar radiation comes into the atmosphere. Another way is actually within the atmosphere, tweaking clouds to make them either more reflective so that they bounce the energy back off, or less reflective so that they could maybe let more energy, or more transparent so they could let more energy through that would not get reflected from the clouds. So these are approaches that are being researched, and there's a lot of papers and thought about these approaches. But for right now, most experts are saying these are far too risky, far too aggressive, and we don't need them yet. But a lot of people saying, well, we might, and we might in the future if we don't get our arms around this problem. This is like these are like efforts of last resort. That if things are really going haywire, these are things that might get tried. But there's all kinds of issues and problems that haven't been studied enough, and we just don't know enough about what bad things could happen in these different scenarios. So let's go back to CDR, which is, again, durably removing and durably storing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. There are ways to do this in both land and ocean. I'm going to get into, we've been through the definitions, the numbers and the definitions. Now I'm going to talk about some of the activities going on. But first, we're going to look at the spectrum, what kind of solutions there are. And they range from being really nature-based to being technology plus nature and some geomimicry, as I mentioned, and then some direct air capture, which is more of a technology oriented. So there's a wide range of solutions, and we're going to talk about some of these and some of the activities going on in them, and in a few minutes. But you can see just having forests and peat and mangroves. There's this thing called biochar. You can just bury trees. You can let algae or seaweed sink to the bottom of the ocean. You can do enhanced rock weathering, which is making rock absorb carbon and create, for example, calcium carbonate or limestone, which is a very good way to permanently store carbon dioxide, or the carbon from the carbon dioxide. And then there's this other approach, which we'll talk about a little more later. Which CDR method is best? This is a very good question, and if I knew the answer, I might bet on it. But I think it's the answer right now is it depends. We don't know yet what's the best answer, and it depends on each approach requires energy and water use. Land use has certain material requirements. There's certain amount of storage and permanence you get. Some of the planting a tree, for example, may not be good for long-term storage, whereas making a rock or having something sink to the bottom of the ocean, those might be really good storage and permanence. Also, some of these approaches lend themselves to better monitoring, reporting, and verification. Ultimately, people are going to be paying money for carbon removal, so they need this whole field of MRV is developing. And some if you can't measure it, did it really happen? That's going to be a really important part of this as well. And then each may have co-benefits or co-risks that come with it. So and ultimately, this best CDR method may be very location dependent. What's applicable in Sonoma County might be totally different from what's applicable in Australia or in Asia or in different geographies around the world. So it's going to be a very exciting time of where the industry is going to be using many solutions, and there's going to be a lot of competition for which is the best. And the chances are pretty good that we're going to need a lot of them, because remember, we need gigatons to be removed at the gigaton scale. It's a very large amount, and we're going to need kind of all we can get, because we don't have a lot of time. We have a few decades to get this figured out, and it's rapidly starting. I'm excited by what's going on, but it's gonna take a lot of efforts and a lot of diversity in the solutions to get where we need to go. To do when you talk about which one is best, you really have to compare by doing this thing called life cycle analysis, which is how you do the CDR math. And typically, life cycle analysis has inputs and outputs that include, what happens to the carbon dioxide and where it goes, how the carbon flows through the system. And it's very complex math. It takes a lot of analysis. Each situation is different. What might on the surface appear to be a really attractive carbon removal may or may not work out because it might take too much energy, or it might be too, it might have other risks that are associated with it. So it really takes a lot of analysis to compare and determine which one's best. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these solutions in the CDR spectrum and what's going on. And it might sound like I'm imitating this guy talking to Ben in the movie The Graduate. The famous line, "One word, Ben, are you listening?" And he says plastics in that one. But so I'm emulating that. We're making it 2 words, and we're going to call it climate restoration, as where all this opportunity is, and where all this excitement is, and where we can look for a lot of things happening in the next few years and decades. So first, let's start a little discussion about tree planting, because I think that the voluntary carbon offset market has been largely based on tree planting. And what that has uncovered is that tree planting is not really carbon dioxide removal. It's not durable storage. In fact, if you take a tree, you plant a tree, it might be decades before its carbon capture is significant. And even if it does carbon capture, what if it gets burned down in a forest fire, or gets eaten by bugs, or whatever happens to trees? Trees die, and it's not reliable, durable storage like that we really need. There is this effort called A Trillion Tons .org, and this is it's a nonprofit organization. There are a lot of good reasons to plant trees, and one of them is the carbon cycle. Certainly, I'm all in favor of trees, but they're not sufficient, even with the large aggressive plans of planting many trees. It's not sufficient to address the gigatons of carbon removal that we need. Now, I want to also make a point that forest management is a very important part of climate efforts. And because if you, for example, let forests burn, that's like deforestation, and then it releases a tremendous amount of carbon. So forest management can be thought of as a mitigation of reducing or reducing emissions, or preventing emissions from happening. And that's if you also consider that there's a lot of work to do to do forest management, and it's a critical part of this, but it's not necessarily carbon dioxide removal, because if you let thin out the brush, for example, and that prevents a forest fire, that is good, because it prevents those emissions from happening in the future. One thing, so here's where I jump into a little bit of some of the solutions that are available. This is a device that takes waste from trees that are used to thin out forests. So it's part of forest management. And you take that waste and you do this, put it into this big machine, and it does this process called pyrolysis, and where you burn it at a very high temperature without oxygen, and it turns into this beautiful stuff called biochar. And biochar is permanently much more durable storage. it's hundreds of years rather than, the trees, which would decompose in a much faster time frame. So biochar is also very good for the soil, and it makes the soil much more fertile and much healthier for microbes and everything else. So biochar is a very good thing to do. So it kind of takes that forest. This device kind of takes that forest management into, maybe, hey, that is some durable storage of carbon dioxide, and that's taken into the realm of CDR. Here's another solution, which is a CDR solution, which is oriented. It's called Takachar is the brand name, and it takes this agricultural waste, and you put it into this reactor, and again, it uses pyrolysis, and it comes out with biochar, which is then used to spread on the fields. So it's like a virtuous cycle. The fields are much healthier for the next year, and you might use much less artificial fertilizer. So these problems with all the fertilizer issues because of the Ukraine war and the supply chain and Africa not being able to buy, the fertilizer, and the fertilizer is way too expensive. A lot of those problems are mitigated by this, and it's really exciting. And I put the picture in of the leaders of this company here because, like a lot of these companies, the leaders are just very young and very excited and very academically oriented. A lot of them are just out of their college or PhD programs, and they have ideas like this, and they're pursuing them very aggressively. This one's very exciting. This one was a recent winner of one of the X prizes. There are other companies here in the U.S. There's a company called Charm Industry, and they take biochar one step further and make this thing called bio oil. So they have a different process that similarly uses the burning without. It uses pyrolysis, so burning without oxygen, but they have it so that it turns it into an oil. And then their idea is to take this oil and bury it somewhere, put it underground, so you'll never see it again. And will it ever return and somehow leak back into carbon dioxide? Well, that's part of what they have to prove, and they seem to be proving it to investors anyway. And it's getting a lot of excitement in that for that company as well. So that's called bio oil, and the process of storing it is called bio oil injection. Here's one that's another one, which is biomass burial. There's a company in Australia called Inter-Earth, which was founded by a couple of farmers who were looking around saying, there's all this land in Australia that's been ruined by mismanagement, and they can grow stuff on it. They can grow these trees that grow very quickly, and then they can just bury the trees. So they have this process where they're going to let the trees grow for like 4 years, and they're going to bury them. And so, wait, is that going to come back? Is that going to really sequester the carbon? Well, there's this organization called Puro Earth, which is actually defining the standards for how you have to bury the trees and what you have to, in what conditions you have to bury the trees. And so they're like almost like a stamp of approval. And this company, Inter-Earth, is playing by the rules and the guidelines of Puro Earth to do it in a way where the carbon dioxide is permanently removed. And so it's another exciting, relatively low-tech way of using nature and burial to sequester carbon. I want to talk a little bit about enhanced rock weathering. Rock weathering is a process that happens in nature where calcium in the environment is exposed to carbon dioxide and creates calcium carbonate, or CaCO3. And the same thing happens with magnesium. And generally, if you look at the Whitestone Cliffs of Dover, I meant to have a picture of that in here, but I don't. Those are limestone cliffs, and they were formed over millions of years. And it's a very slow process, but there are a lot of the technologies now, a lot of the efforts and the research going into looking into how to accelerate this process and how to get calcium carbonate available in many Golden Gate Bridges worth. And so here's an example. This is a mine, and it turns out that mine waste is rich in calcium and or magnesium. And so with the right conditions, you can use mine waste as the feedstock for sequestering carbon. Also, if you just get the calcium, you can chop it up and put it into fields, and it will actually absorb the carbon in the fields. And so this is something that's being tried now. As you might imagine, some of these techniques where you're taking ground up rock and spreading it on fields is much harder, much more difficult to do that monitoring and verification, monitoring, reporting, and verification. It takes a lot of science to be able to really analyze this problem and really be able to certify how much carbon you're removing. But a lot of research is going on in this area, and a lot of people are working on it. So it's another exciting area. I'll come back to the rock weathering in a minute. There's this other thing in climate tech. The real tech solution here is this thing called direct air capture. Direct air capture is a kind of a frenzy right now. There's about 50 startups pursuing this market, and they're all over the world. There's a lot of them actually here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they're pursuing different parts of the technology. Some are pursuing the way that the carbon dioxide gets absorbed, either by a solvent if it's liquid, or by a sorbent if it's air, and then figuring out how to get it out of that solvent or sorbent and then into something where you can then figure out how to store it or remove it permanently. So a lot of activity going on in this market. This is a system called Project Orca, which a company called Climeworks has done in Iceland, and it's been going for a couple years. And it's currently a full system which does the carbon dioxide removal directly out of the atmosphere, and then it takes it and buries it underground in geological storage. So in fact, this is powered by geothermal energy that's available on site. So this is a nice system. And right now it's on the order of kilotons, thousands of tons per year of storage. So it's a great pilot project. It showed what can be done, but it's nowhere near significant enough to move the needle on what we need for carbon dioxide removal. But it's got people, excited and jazzed and taking the next step. And here's a project that was supposed to get its groundbreaking this week. In fact, this is an artist rendition of a system that will be the world's largest CO2 direct air capture to be built in Texas. This is done by a company called Carbon Engineering, and it's funded by a company called Occidental Petroleum. And their shtick is that they're going to provide net zero oil, which means that the oil that they will be able to provide you will be offset. The emissions that they'll be able to provide, the emissions from the oil they provide you will be offset by this direct air capture of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They're actually also proposing using that carbon dioxide to use it in what they call enhanced oil recovery, or EOR. So that's a way of injecting the carbon dioxide into its permanent storage, and at the same time getting some of the leftover oil out. And so they can economically get oil out and sequester carbon at the same time. Now, this area is very controversial, and there's a lot of people that are maybe not real excited about seeing oil companies getting into this space, because direct air capture could be sort of seen as an excuse to continue with the whole oil company domination and the continued use of fossil fuels. And don't we really need to get off of fossil fuels? And I think this kind of activity is actually what is making a lot of progressives, including progressive politicians, very averse to having this kind of thing. On the other side, it may be very easy for a more conservative or business-oriented politicians to be anxious to leverage and build off of this. So it's definitely where there's a lot of energy right now, and the whole idea of net zero oil is one that's going to be floated out there, and whether or not people accept it is going to be really interesting. Carbon utilization is something I wanted to also mention. Is once you get the carbon out, you have the carbon dioxide from the air, you have to do something with it. And remember, from that definition of carbon dioxide removal, you can have it durably stored in oceans or land or in products. Well, here's some examples of products where you can store a significant amount of carbon. And synthetic concrete is one. There's this company called Blue Planet that just got a $400 million investment to continue what they're doing. And they're actually using carbon from CCS right now, but they could do it from DAC. They're getting the carbon from the air, and then they're building concrete using that carbon. So they're creating concrete using that, similar to getting the calcium carbonates or other things that bond carbon from the atmosphere into their product. By the way, concrete is the largest single product that gets installed around the world. Is second largest. I think the largest is water. The product that's most used. Second largest is concrete. So there are literally many gigatons of concrete installed every year, and this would be a way of making a big dent in that. If we can find a good way to do that, and companies, multiple companies are working on that as well. There's also a lot of talk now about air to fuels. What this means is that fuels like what we drive, gasoline we drive our cars, or fuels that are used for aviation are hydrocarbons. So they have combinations of hydrogen and carbon. And there are people who are working on using direct air capture systems, taking that atmospheric carbon dioxide, going through a fuel synthesis, and creating fuels for that would be ultra low carbon or zero carbon fuels. Now, where they're getting the hydrogen is a trick here, because currently a lot of hydrogen is produced from methane and doesn't work out so well in the life cycle analysis. But if you can use water, which has hydrogen in it, and you can electrolyze that water and use the hydrogen in your hydrocarbons, that may be something that in the future this really develops into something where we'll be able to fly airplanes that are carbon free. And that's something that is something that's probably going to develop in the future, but it's still in its early phases. Carbon Engineering is one of the companies that are working on that as well. Shifting for a moment to the oceans, there's a tremendous amount of work going on in the oceans. I don't really have a lot of slides to discuss these in detail, but there's an organization called Ocean Visions, which is looking at ways that that the oceans can maybe heal themselves or get help in healing themselves. There's the acidity of the ocean is greatly increased by absorbing all the carbon from the what we've done to the atmosphere, and so there's a process called ocean alkalinity enhancement, which removes some of that acidity and allows you to improve the situation, and also possibly improve the ecology of different parts of the ocean as well. But there are also things called marine permaculture, where you can farm seaweed for products as well as for just absorbing the carbon, and then that can sink to the bottom of the ocean, and then you never hear from it again. There's a lot of study going on about whether that's really true, whether the carbon really does get sequestered durably, and so it's still something being investigated, and a lot of organizations are really looking into this right now. The ocean has tremendous potential to be a big part of the solution, and rightly so. It's getting a lot of attention right now. So let's shift from kind of some of the different approaches to carbon removal to some of the other opportunities in this space. There's some financial things going on. There's this organization called Frontier, which is led by the company called Stripe, and they have gotten a lot of other sponsors, are investing over $1 billion in what they call advanced market commitment for CDR. So advanced market commitment is they're funding a lot of these startups with money to go ahead and remove carbon. So they're basically buying ahead on so allowing these customers to these companies, these startups, to get going and to get the kilotons or megatons or whatever they got going, and they're buying from that pool. So it's an exciting field, and a lot of work's going on here, a lot of expertise being developed to make sure that that $1 billion is spent, on things that are really removing the carbon dioxide. And so there's a lot of climate experts in this organization. As far as other financial things, there's a lot of investment funds. If you just do a carbon removal investment funds, you see organizations like the Carbon Collective, the Elemental Accelerator, and Activate, and these are at different stages. There are different stages. They're supporting startups to get into this business, and they'll support different types of organizations too, like nonprofits or technology firms. And there's a tremendous amount of activity going on in that space right now. Other things that are happening, corporations are under a lot of pressure to make commitments. And this is one of the most interesting, I think, is Microsoft has committed by 2030 to remove all the carbon that it emits. So it will remove as much carbon as it emits. So it'll be carbon net zero by 2030, which is significant. But that's not all. They're going to set themselves on a path to remove by 2050 all the carbon the company has emitted, either directly or by electrical consumption, since it was founded in 1975. So every bit of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere, because Microsoft existed, is going to be removed by Microsoft by 2050. So this whole emission profile is going to be erased. It's just a fascinating thing to think about that from a personal point of view, or a country's point of view, or the world's point of view. That's kind of what we all need to do. But this company is because they, are have the funds to do it and the expertise to do it, are committing to that. Now, are they going to go out and remove the carbon dioxide themselves? No, they're going to fund somebody else to go take care of the carbon dioxide for them, but they're going to do it in a way that isn't just planting trees. It's going to capture it and durably store it using CDR. So a very kind of big, hairy, audacious goal on the part of Microsoft. In terms of what's happening with universities, I know a lot of you maybe have know people who are in universities. I started to do a slide that I could show some of the top universities worldwide that have active programs on climate research and carbon dioxide removal. And my slide got very busy very fast. All over the world, there's so much happening, and it's really an indication that young people are really having a tremendous amount of interest and enthusiasm for climate solutions, and so that's what's going on here. And I'm over time, and I'm going to accelerate here. Another opportunity is for government actions. There's a lot of activity in government right now, from state level, CDR Leadership Act. There's a law under consideration there. There's these thing called DAC hubs that the government's supporting based on the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. The Inflation Reduction Act adds tax credits for DAC as well as for CCS. And there's a Department of Energy initiative called the Negative Carbon Shot, which is trying to figure out how to get carbon, how to go carbon negative as soon as possible. And that's where there's a lot of activity from the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. In California specifically, we have some very aggressive policies to get 40% below our baseline, which I think is 1995 levels, by 2030, and go net zero by 2045. That's going to take a lot of carbon dioxide removal to enable that. And in fact, this state senator just introduced a bill which will require the main polluters to pay for CDR as a percent of their emissions. So they'll have to remove a percentage of their emissions every year, and the percentage increases over time, so that will enable that 2045 goal. As far as opportunities for Rotary, Rotary has the Environmental Avenue of Service. There's a Environmental Sustainability Action Group. A lot of activities going on in Interact clubs. There's a Climate Action Team Network. There are different ideas for projects that we could do, like this biochar thing in Africa, or the Takachar that I mentioned earlier, which might be a good solution for rural farming. Definitely the four-way test hasn't been too followed in terms of climate change so far, but the good news is that the current climate activities are really science-based, so they're the truth. They're trying to be more fair, and as evidenced by the recent loss and damage thing at the COP. And they're definitely involving stakeholders, trying to build goodwill and friendship, and trying to develop workforces and quality jobs along the way. So definitely a lot more excitement there. As far as action on climate, I really recommend looking into some of the groups that are available to join. You can do a lot of it remotely. Tom and Barbara, as I mentioned, are leaders in our local chapter of our Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a good one to really get active in those the whole process. And just as in coming to close to the end here, I just want to reemphasize that it's not all about carbon removal. We also have to do the mitigation and the adaptation as part of overall what we have to do for the climate. And this is a picture of one of the climate heroes that's emerging here, Greta Thunberg, who this is when she was 15 years old, gave a TED talk. If you want to be inspired about climate, go look at that TED talk. But she just emphasizes in this speech the importance of action. Once we start to act, hope is everywhere. So instead of looking for hope, look for action. Then and only then, hope will come. Thank you for the time, and I'm sorry I went over. I'm happy to keep discussing this for anybody who's interested. Thanks.